Now let's start with today's story. My name is Martha Smith. I was dying. My body was frail and withered, barely held the strength to sit up, but my mind was still sharp. I had carried secrets for decades, secrets that I had vowed to take to my grave. But now, with time slipping through my fingers, I needed to tell the truth. Kevin, my son, sat in the chair beside me, his face lined with worry and sadness. Terry, my grandson, perched on the edge of the bed, his youthful energy barely contained. "Close the door, Kevin," I rasped. He hesitated for a moment, but obeyed. As the latch clicked shut, I took a slow, shuddering breath. I looked at them both, my gaze lingering on Terry. He deserved to know what kind of blood ran in his veins. "There's something you need to know, Terry," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something I've never spoken about before." Kevin leaned forward, his brows furrowed. "Mom, you don't have to." I held up a frail hand to silence him. "No, I do. I must. Before I go." Terry's eyes, so much like mine once were, bright, curious, untamed, widened with anticipation. "What is it, Grandma?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I wasn't always just Martha Smith, the loving mother and grandmother you know. I had another name, another life. I was a CIA special operative during the 90s. The room fell silent. Kevin's face drained of color. "What?" I ignored his disbelief and pressed on. "My specialty was espionage and assassination." Terry's mouth dropped open. "No way." His voice was filled with awe. Kevin shook his head. "Mom, you've got to be joking. You were a librarian for 30 years. I let out a weak chuckle. "That's what you were supposed to believe. A cover identity, carefully crafted. But before that, I was part of operations you'll never find in history books. Missions that shaped the world from the shadows." Terry leaned in, his youthful excitement uncontainable. "You mean, you were like James Bond?" I smiled again, this time with a hint of nostalgia. "Something like that. I was better than James Bond. More like the Black Widow from the comics." "Wow," Terry said, eyes gleaming with excitement. I took another breath and steadied myself. "Now, what I have to tell you is about your mother, Terry. I was holding on to this for ages." Kevin interjected, "Mom, you don't have to." I raised my hand and silenced him. "No, the kid needs to know." Then I began again. "Your parents were married just after their graduation. I never liked your mother. I always felt that she was a bad woman. I would have loved to be wrong, but 2 years after you were born, I retired and moved to a house nearby. I always felt that she was cheating on Kevin, so I kept an eye on her. One day, I was in a cafe with a friend of mine, and then I saw her with Donald Parker. He was your father's friend. I was surprised because your father was out of town, and no married woman should be out having coffee with another man when her husband is not at home. But then, times had changed, I suppose. Still, the thought lingered in me. That's when I started to follow your mother." I laughed and said, "I felt like my old days, following my targets until I either took them out or put them in a trap for someone else to take care of them." What I suspected was correct. Your mother, Linda, was sleeping with Donald. So, I called a few friends of mine to find out more. I could see the shock settle on Kevin's face, the disbelief warring with the trust he had in me. Terry, on the other hand, looked exhilarated, as if he had just stepped into the pages of a spy novel. But this was no fiction. This was real. "I followed her for 3 days," I continued, my voice steady despite the memories that clawed at my mind. "I had her phone tapped, her emails hacked. I did the same to Donald. Initially, I planned to gather all the evidence and have Kevin divorce her, but then I heard something that changed everything." Kevin shook his head, his lips parting, but no words came. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the need to refute my claims battling against the undeniable certainty that I had never lied to him before. "What did you hear?" Terry asked, his voice hushed, reverent almost. I sighed, glancing between them before I spoke again. "I overheard a conversation between Linda and Donald. She wasn't just betraying Kevin, she was plotting to kill him." Kevin jerked back as if I had struck him. That's insane." "No, it's not." My voice was firm. "She had a plan. First, she'd stage their affair being discovered, make sure someone, maybe even me, caught them together and made sure Kevin found out. That way, it would seem like the natural course of events when Kevin was later found dead." Kevin's face drained of color. "Dead?" "She planned to poison you," I said bluntly, "to make it look like you couldn't live with the betrayal, that the grief drove you to take your own life." Terry gasped. "No way." Kevin buried his face in his hands, his body shaking. No, she wouldn't. She would. I interrupted. And she did plan it. I heard her tell Donald, clear as day, once Kevin finds out, I'll disappear for a few hours. When I come back, he'll be so broken that he won't resist when I pour him a drink. Just a little extra on his whiskey, and it's over. No suspicion. No loose ends. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kevin looked up at me, his eyes wet. Why would she do this? For his business, I answered, my voice tinged with ice. With you gone, she'd have control. She thought she was clever. Thought she could get away with it. Terry clenched his fists. Did she? Did she get away with it? I let out a slow breath and met his gaze, my old instincts stirring within me. I was not going to let that happen. Kevin was in Burlington. I called a friend of mine and had him arrested for charges of theft and carjacking. It was easy. I knew he would call Linda, but I had made sure that the call never reached Linda. So, he called me. Mom? What the hell is going on? Kevin's voice was frantic. Stay put, Kevin. I'm on my way, I said calmly. Does Linda know? Can you tell her? He asked, desperation lacing his voice. I took a measured breath. I haven't seen her, I lied. Just sit tight. I'll handle everything. I executed the next part of my plan. I called another friend of mine. Her name is Lisa. Well, that is not her real name. Even to this day, I don't know her real name. But she came quickly. When she arrived, she barely glanced at me before getting straight to the point. What's the situation? I explained everything in detail, laying out Linda's plan, Kevin's predicament, and what I needed from her. Lisa listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally nodding. When I was finished, she crossed her arms and exhaled sharply. All right, I'll help you. Relief flooded through me. She agreed to help me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before knocking on Linda's door. The woman who answered was as polished as ever, her blonde hair perfectly in place, her makeup flawless. But beneath that perfect exterior, I knew the rot that lurked within. Martha? What brings you here? She asked, feigning politeness. I forced a tight smile. It's Kevin. He's in trouble. Arrested in Burlington. I need you to go and get him out. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I thought I saw genuine concern. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by something more calculated. Arrested? For what? Theft and carjacking, I said flatly, watching her reaction. Linda scoffed. That's ridiculous. Kevin would never. It doesn't matter what he would or wouldn't do. The fact is, he's in jail, and he needs you. I leaned in slightly. Take someone with you. Don't go alone. Her gaze flickered with hesitation, and I knew exactly who she was thinking of. Donald. I had played my cards just right. She bit her lip, pretending to think. I'll call someone. Good, I said. Leave Terry with me. He shouldn't have to see his father like that. I didn't wait for her answer. I stepped past her into the house, picking up Terry and balancing him on my hip. He looked at me with those big, innocent eyes, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Linda was already dialing her phone before I even left. I could hear the first ring as I shut the door behind me, carrying Terry away to safety. It wasn't long before Donald arrived. I watched from a distance as he strode up to Linda's door. They didn't waste time. They went in and I could see from the thermal scope that they were in the bedroom, having sex. After an hour, they got into the car and drove off toward Burlington. I waited until their taillights disappeared down the road before I pulled out my burner phone. I pressed one button and brought it to my ear. The goose has left, I said simply. Lisa's voice came through the line, smooth and unreadable. Understood. Moving in now. I hung up, exhaling slowly. Now, it was time for the next phase of the plan. 7 miles outside the Charlotte border, Lisa and her team intercepted them. The crash was intended, a controlled chaos to mask the real goal. Lisa's team had made sure to steer the vehicle off the road at just the right moment, setting up the scenario perfectly. The crash had been dramatic enough to throw off any suspicion, but controlled enough that neither of the targets had been seriously injured. The van was already waiting, hidden away on a darkened side road just beyond the accident site, ready to take them into custody without any witnesses being the wiser. Minutes later, a message pinged on my phone, a set of coordinates flashing on the screen. I looked over the numbers quickly. An abandoned warehouse just beyond the town's outskirts, far enough out that it wouldn't draw attention but close enough to be accessible. Lisa had done her job perfectly. As soon as the phone rang, I knew the moment had arrived. I picked it up, the chill of anticipation running through me. Lisa's voice crackled through the receiver, calm and efficient as always. The goose has landed, she said, her tone flat. Sending location. Minutes later, a message pinged on my phone, a set of coordinates flashing on the screen. I looked over the numbers quickly. An abandoned warehouse just beyond the town's outskirts, far enough out that it wouldn't draw attention, but close enough to be accessible. I hung up and went to my room. I called a babysitter, another CIA operative named Butch. He used to be part of my team. Terry shot back. Uncle Butch was CIA? I smiled and said, yes, he was the muscle of my team. Then I got dressed once again. My usual for assassinations, a simple gray suit with a white shirt. I drove and reached the location in 45 minutes. I parked the car and stepped out, my boots crunching against the gravel underfoot as I made my way toward the warehouse. The scene before me was exactly as planned. Two bodies sprawled on the cold concrete, covered in blood and mud, hands tied behind their backs, blindfolded. I felt no pity. They were obstacles, nothing more, and I had no room for sentiment. I reached for the water pipe nearby, turning it on with a twist of my wrist. The cold, steady stream of water hissed as it began to flow, and I aimed the spray at them. First, I focused on Linda, the woman whose deceit had set everything in motion. The water splashed over her, washing away the layers of dirt and blood. Her body shuddered slightly at the cold touch, but she remained still. Her eyes, hidden behind the blindfold, told a story of fear and confusion. She could hear me, she could feel me, but she had no idea what would come next. I moved over to Donald, still unconscious, his face twisted with the bruises and injuries from the crash. I aimed the stream at him, washing away the mud that clung to his skin. The water cascaded down, revealing his pale, battered face. He would wake soon enough, but for now, he was just a broken figure, lying on the cold concrete. Once they were both sufficiently washed of the grime, I took a step back, assessing the scene. They looked almost human again, but they weren't. They weren't innocent. They weren't victims. I watched her tremble, her body shaking from the cold and fear, and I felt no sympathy. Linda was nothing more than a traitor. Someone who'd planned to take my son's life, and for what? To get her hands on his business? I couldn't care less about her excuses, her reasons, or what had pushed her to the point of betrayal. With a deep breath, I straightened my suit, taking one last look at the two of them, knowing that their lives were about to end. We've come too far for stupid questions, so, answer this. Did you really think you would get away with it, Linda? I watched her eyes dart around the dimly lit warehouse. She didn't answer. Her lips quivered but remained sealed, and the silence between us thickened. I could see the fear pooling in her eyes, but she refused to speak. I couldn't let her go on like this. My patience was thin, and the truth had to be dragged from her, even if it meant breaking her. I raised my hand, and with one swift motion, slapped her across the face. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. Her head snapped to the side, and a small gasp escaped her lips. I didn't wait for her to recover. I asked you something, woman, I growled. Answer me, or I'll have no issues continuing to slap you till your cheeks bleed. My eyes locked on hers, cold and unwavering. Do you think you can just play with people's lives and walk away untouched? Do you really believe that? Linda winced, her eyes wet with unshed tears, but she stayed silent. My patience snapped. No more games, I hissed. Answer me now, Linda. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Her lips trembled, and finally, she opened her mouth, but it wasn't the answer I wanted. I thought I could control it. I thought I could make it look like he just fell apart. I leaned in closer, putting my face near hers, my voice a deadly whisper. You thought you could make it look like he did it to himself? You thought you could poison him and get away with it? You've made a grave mistake, Linda. She closed her eyes, probably wishing she could disappear. But that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to let her think she could hurt my son and get off scot-free. Another slap, harder this time, until her cheeks stung like fire. I turned away from Linda and moved over to Donald. He was supposed to be Kevin's friend, but I knew better. The way he'd looked at her, the way he tried to worm his way into her life, it made my blood boil. He could sit there in silence all he wanted, but I wasn't here for small talk. You were his friend, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. Do you even know the meaning of the word friend? Or were you just trying to get closer to his wife? My words cut through the air like a knife, and his silence only made me angrier. I stepped back, giving Justin the signal. He was built like a tank, towering over everyone in the room. I watched as he walked up to Donald, his movements controlled, like he'd done this 1,000 times. He grabbed Donald by the cheek, his hands massive, as if inspecting him like some prize fighter before a match. Then, in one lightning-fast motion, Justin slapped him. The sound of it echoed in the room, sharp and final. Donald's head snapped to the side, and he crumpled to the floor like a rag doll, out cold before he even hit the ground. Justin turned to me, a hint of apology in his eyes. "Sorry, I guess I knocked him out," he said, his tone genuinely regretful but with a bit of a smile creeping onto his face. I didn't respond right away, just watching Donald's limp body on the floor. I nodded. "It's okay," I finally said, a faint smile of my own tugging at my lips. We needed him out of the way. I walked past them, my mind already on the next step. I stopped in front of Lisa, who had been waiting patiently nearby, her face betraying none of the emotions she must have been feeling. I leaned down and whispered to her, my voice low but firm. "It's time," I said, the words heavy with finality. "End it." She smiled and nodded. I watched as Lisa moved with eerie calmness, stepping toward Donald and Linda with a syringe in her hand. She was precise and methodical, just like everything else she did. The needle slid into their skin without a hint of hesitation, and the substance took effect almost immediately. Their bodies, once tense and struggling, slowly relaxed as the chemical compound began to do its work. The color drained from their faces, but the fear in their eyes remained, at least for now. Lisa sat next to Linda, her voice soft but chilling. "Let me explain what is going to happen," she said, leaning in as if she were telling a bedtime story. "This chemical will soothe your body, and you won't feel any pain. The last thing you'll remember is drifting away." Linda's eyes flickered with confusion, but her voice was barely a whisper. What are you going to do to us?" Lisa didn't answer right away. Instead, she continued with the same unsettling calmness. "I'm going to put you in a container and freeze you," she said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "Then, I will put you in a wood chipper and scatter you in the Catawba River. The fish will be happy to feed. You'll be of some use to the ecosystem." I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction as Lisa spoke. She had always been the one who kept things cool under pressure, but hearing it from her made it feel more real. Linda's face was pale, her mouth opening and closing as though she was trying to speak, but no words came out. I could tell she was struggling to comprehend what was happening to her, to them. Lisa smiled softly, almost sympathetically. "No one will find you. No one will ever know where you went. The car has already been crushed and sent to a smelting plant." So, she paused for a moment, looking at Linda and Donald's empty expressions. "Basically, the aliens abducted you with your car." I exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of everything that had transpired. My heart was heavy, but there was no turning back now. I turned to Terry, my grandson, guilt and sorrow in my eyes. "I'm sorry, son," I said, my voice shaky, barely above a whisper. "I killed your mother." The words were like stones in my chest. Kevin, my son, had never known the truth. I could never bring myself to tell him the whole story, about Linda's betrayal, about everything I'd done to protect them both. I looked at Kevin, my heart breaking for him. "Kevin, I'm sorry I never told you this," I continued, my voice cracking. "The entire town just knew that Linda disappeared with Donald while her husband was arrested for a case of mistaken identity. I made sure the papers published various misleading articles, some even hinting at alien abductions. I had to make sure my son and grandson were safe. I couldn't risk anyone knowing the truth." Kevin sat there in silence, his face unreadable. And Terry just stared at me, his eyes wide with something I couldn't place. But then, as if to ease my pain, Terry finally spoke. "Grandma," he said softly, "you did good. I am what I am because of you and Dad." The word stung, but there was something else too, pride. Maybe. I could feel the weight of the years lifting off me, the burden of my choices, all of it. And then, Kevin got up, walking over to me. Without saying a word, he pulled me into a hug. The warmth of his embrace, the quiet comfort, was all I needed. It was the last piece of reassurance I needed before I let go. I could feel my body growing weak, my breath slowing. This was it. My time had come. I closed my eyes, a small, content smile tugging at the corner of my lips as I took my last breath, letting the world fade away. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.